stores and things that maybe we've inherited that we don't know what they are worth or the stories behind them. So we've created a new program called If This Brooch Could Talk. And we are delighted to have in our studio Gay Sherman-Wentz, who is an expert when it comes to jewelry of all sorts. And welcome to the program. We're so delighted to kick it off with you.
Thanks a lot, Ivy. I'm excited about it. And a lot of people don't know that the Connecticut River Valley area is actually a treasure trove for vintage and antique jewelry. And a lot of people don't know what they have or what it's worth.
And you have been an expert in terms of being an appraiser and going to appraisal events for many years. Let's talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah, for the past 4 years, I've been doing the appraisal fundraising event for the Chester Historical Society, and that's been a great time because you just never know what's going to come out of the woodwork and be placed in front of you. So it's, for me, every time I see something that I haven't seen before, it's like Christmas. And we're going to be talking a little bit about Christmas pins today, not to mention.
That's such a festive time of year with everyone wearing the wonderful brooches, and whether it's earrings or a lovely necklace or rings or pins.
Exactly. The Christmas tree pin, I think, is especially is dear to a lot of people's hearts because, of course, the Christmas season is about family and celebrating, and so a lot of people have fond memories about Christmas tree pins that their mom or their grandmother wore. So many people come up to me and, will mention that or say that, when I show them some of the books that I have, they're like, oh my God, my aunt had that pin, or, things like that. So it's pretty cool. And it's very nostalgic.
Yes, and at the recent event that was an appraisal event here in Chester, Connecticut, you came across some jewelry too, and I believe there were some that had some interesting stories. One of them may have been a Christmas pin or not. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Well, actually, we It was like, holy cow. It's like I struck gold, or struck diamonds, should I say. When I looked at the tree, it just had amazing sparkle. And I was like, wow, these stones, I was like, these aren't rhinestones. And I was like, well,
you knew right away they were diamonds.
Well, no. Well, I had, sneaking suspicion.
Right.
And so that's why I had a master gemologist look at them, and sure enough, they were diamonds. And I was like, holy cow. And, so that, I was like extremely intrigued about this tree, trying to get information. And then after the show, we had talked about this mystery. I was contacted by a serious Christmas tree pin collector, and she actually had this tree in the past, lost it, and was still looking for it. And when she saw my tree on Ruby Lane, she was like, she was giving me information about it. And she actually had the original card that went with the tree. So I found out that the tree was actually designed by Lee Soda. He's a designer out of Philadelphia, went to the famous art school there. And he's designed things for the Franklin Mint, for Lenox, some pretty famous companies. So he's a very well-known designer. And she had the tag that said, it was designed by Lee Soda, who was president of Gorham at that time. So I was trying to find out the year. So I looked up the president's name, and I had to research like crazy, but found out when she was president. And he also won an award for designing this tree in '94, but it actually wasn't produced until 1998. So it's a recent tree. But the other kicker is that on the original card, this tree was set with cubic zirconia crystals.
Uh-huh.
So the original tree had crystals in it. but this one has diamonds. So I'm like, okay, so the mystery deepens. I mean, the only thing I can guess is that whoever bought, the Gorham tree loved it so much. Maybe it was, the spouse who decided to surprise his wife and reset it with diamonds, or it was the collector herself who said,
I want an upgrade.
Yeah. She definitely upgraded it to rock star status. So yeah, this tree is rocking for sure. With actually, it has 29 diamonds, total carat weight of 1.2 carats.
And what's that worth?
It's worth around $3,000.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an expensive Christmas tree pin, and it's not even that big. Let's see, how big is it? It's like 1 inch. 1 5/8. It's almost 2 inches tall.
An example of big things coming in small packages. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So anyway, that's I have somewhat solved the mystery of that tree that we talked about way back when.
Well, it's so interesting, this, as you talk about Christmas tree pins. I had a Christmas tree pin when I was a youngster, and not as fancy as the one you're speaking of, but it was about, I would say 1.5 to 2 inches, just a simple, brightly colored, looked like the lights on the tree on the little, and I have to say, that was a really kind of a sentimental piece to just bring it out at the holidays and wear it and share it. And so I think it's really fascinating for people who, especially those that collect them as well, because there's such a history behind it. And my understanding is that you have a guest today who has really been focusing on this particular kind of jewelry, Christmas tree pins specifically.
Yeah, it's actually a whole sort of subculture under vintage jewelry collecting. There's actually a pretty large amount of Christmas tree pin collectors out there. You'd be surprised.
And who is your guest today?
My guest is Jill Galena. She actually authored 3 books on Christmas tree pins. Her most recent one, they're all called Christmas Pins Past and Present, and her most recent 3rd edition was published in 2013. And Jill, it's not what she does for a living. This is her hobby, actually, but she has obviously an extreme passion for it. We were talking yesterday on the phone, and she said, you wouldn't believe how many trees I have. And I said, I can just imagine. I'm sure she probably has over 500 Christmas tree pins.
Goodness.
And
What a collection.
I believe that we have Jill on the line. Jill, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Welcome to If This Brooch Could Talk. We're delighted.
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you folks.
We want to learn more about some of your knowledge, and I'm going to pass it back to Gay, who's got some questions for you.
Hi, Jill.
Great. Hi, Gay. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Wonderful.
Well, we were talking yesterday, kind of starting from the beginning. Ibby was just saying, she remembers she had a Christmas tree pin. And when we were talking yesterday, you were telling me your story about your first Christmas tree pin, which I believe we have the picture posted of it on the radio station's Facebook page.
Yes, there's a photograph, both of you, Jill, and of a pin that you're wearing as well. And then a collection of pins that I just posted moments ago.
Okay, great. Well, actually, I've always loved antiques of any sort, and my actual passion for collecting Christmas pins started many years ago when I was at an antique market, actually Renninger's, which many of you might know is this huge antique market, and I was just wandering around, and this beautiful Christmas pin kind of popped out from a case. It just caught my eye, and I bought it. I knew nothing about Christmas pins at the time, and it just was so sparkly and so beautiful, and I took it home, and believe it or not, within probably 3 or 4 months, I had probably accumulated maybe about 40 pins, because I have to have my collections pronto changeo. I don't take years to collect things. If I have a passion for something, I collect them pretty quickly, and it just really started the whole craze for me. And what got me into doing the books is I've always had collector books, which was, for many of you who collect antiques know, they do the history of many different kinds of collectibles and antiques, and I noticed that there was nothing on the history of the Christmas pin, and I decided to do some research, and I approached them about doing a book, and that's really what got me into the whole writing genre and actually collecting the pins, which, as Gay has said, I've done 3 books over the past, 15 years.
Do you update the books considerably in 3 different editions?
Yes, well, actually, it's really interesting because the very first book was quite primitive in the sense that my husband took the pictures. It was written when the internet was so accessible, so I didn't really have access to a lot of different collectors to use their pins. And also, for gaining information, you just had to use the telephone for doing research. But from the time that I did the first book to the time this third book has come out, I have certainly found out some very interesting things. I've had to change some of the things that I've written. For instance, as I was saying to Gay yesterday, when I first started doing this, there weren't really a lot of pins that were being reproduced. It was kind of rare to find pins being reproduced and copies being made. But after the books came out and people realized how valuable some of them could be, some of these pins that sold in, the 5 and 10s for 5 and 10 cents were now worth, $100, $200, $300 and upwards. Unfortunately, a lot of companies started reproducing them. And I found from the first book that, to this book now, one of the pins I had in the first book was a pin that was signed by Kenneth J. Lane, who many people probably know also as a well-known jewelry designer.
Yeah, major New York designer.
Yes, I put the pin in the book with, this was, done by Kenneth J. Lane. And later on found out, when I did book 2, that by speaking with his secretary, that he never, ever designed a Christmas pin. And since then, I had seen several copies of that. So, of course, I had to put in my next book that was not of Kenneth J. Lane, and the only pins Kenneth J. Lane ever designed were for the Franklin Mint. So, I've had those kind of things got updated. Plus, in the first book, I did mostly the old designers like Weiss and Hollycraft and designers of that genre and that age. And since then, I have found there's so many wonderfully talented current jewelry designers who are designing these beautiful, big and bold Christmas pins that sell for upwards of $500 and $600. And I have featured a lot of them in the more current books.
How do you go about finding these wonderful designers? What's your methodology for researching them, or do you meet them in person at events?
Well, she's met a number of them.
Well, some of them, by the time book 2 came out, the internet was already available to me. So some of them, I just would look on their website, and many of them have contact information, and then I'd contact them, and then we would speak, and most of them were very, very excited about having their jewelry featured in a book. So there was no problem. As a matter of fact, they have been so wonderfully kind to me over the years that, they've given me books, pins as presents, and I've become personal friends with some of them. There's a wonderful designer, Gerard Yaska, who is in New York City. He also teaches jewelry design. And I found for my first book, I found one of his pins at a flea market in New York City. And somehow or other, I was able to contact him. And I had more of his pins in book 2. And then by the time book 3 came along, he actually designed. He hadn't designed any more Christmas pins over the years, but he designed 2 pins for the new book. And I was so fortunate. I went into the city and I met him and went to his studio and his show place, and it's just fantastic. He's an amazingly talented man. And I think we have his pins featured on your website as well.
What fun. What would you tell people who are interested in collecting are some of the features that people might want to look for if they're looking at pins or find one in an estate sale or a yard sale even?
Well, the first thing I tell people to do is turn the pin over to see if it's signed on the back. Because, and when I do a talk, which I don't do that often because I think I heard Gay saying this is my passion, not my profession. My profession is, believe it or not, I write music, and that keeps me very, very busy. But I have done talks, at libraries and different venues about collecting Christmas pins, and I always tell people, please be sure, number 1, to look on the back. That's the first step. Then, as I said, nowadays you can't always tell if it's reproduced. It should have some age to it, but people who reproduce these pins sometimes are very skilled as well, so you can't always tell. I always say also, please buy through a reputable person. I mean, if you go to a consignment store, many times you will find old pins that they don't really know, I don't think anybody would know. Somebody could, put a reproduced pin amongst a bunch of old Christmas pins, but you really have to be very, very careful. Look at the back of the pin, see if it has some age to it. The condition of the pin is very important as to the value of it. And buy your pins through reputable people. It's hard because eBay, has become so huge in the marketplace now for attaining and obtaining Christmas pins. And I've found so many copies of things on eBay. I mean, personally, I've even bought one that I thought was real, and when I got it home, it was a copy of a Hollycraft pin. And I did contact the person I bought it from and told her, and she immediately, she felt terrible, and she took it back. She actually told me to keep it, but I said no, I was going to return it to her. So you just have to be very, very careful, and it's hard to say, how you become knowledgeable. I guess Gay could add something to that as well.
Well, it's just experience. I mean, looking, as I had said to Ibby before you got on air, Jill, that, I look at probably hundreds and thousands of trees per day. So it's just a matter of knowing what you're looking for as to the age of the pin. I can tell the difference between an older pin and newer casting, right. Something that's been reproduced in China or what have you. I had to laugh when you said turn it over, because that's my kind of tip of the day. Because every time I approach somebody, they show me an old pin, I'll say, well, is it signed? Is there a maker's mark on the back? And they're like, oh, I never thought to do that.
Right, exactly. Exactly, because I don't think people realize that this old jewelry was signed. And that's another thing that I found so interesting when I was doing all my research for the books, that there was a designer who was very, very well known, and is not only for Christmas pins, but for costume jewelry, named Weiss. And I just didn't know very much I couldn't find out too much about him, but by the time my second book came out, I found out that actually Weiss was just a very wealthy businessman who stamped his name on the back of pins, but most of his pins were designed by a man named Dominic Terra, who was a little Italian immigrant who was very, very talented, and he made these beautiful, beautiful pins. And since then, since the second book came out, he now designs pins. He's in his late 80s, if you can believe it, but he designs these beautiful pins under the name Dominique. But, by doing a lot of research, I have found out, like the errors of my old ways, and, found out some of the mistakes I made in the first book, which I have hopefully corrected. And you never know. I might find some things that were in the third book. I don't think there'll ever be a fourth book at this point. I said that after the first book, I'd never do a second book. And Collector Book said, book one sold out, you have to do a second book. And I said, no way. I said, my husband's not going to take 700 pictures. And they told me to come down. At the time, they were located in Paducah, Kentucky. And they said they'd take all the pictures if I got the pins. So that's how book two came about.
And the title of your book is still?
It's still Christmas Pins, Past and Present, Identification and Value Guide, and this new one is the third edition.
Yeah, and actually, Jill, I can't remember if I contacted you or you contacted me for the third edition, but I ended up...
I don't know how we found each other, but Gay was just amazing. If I couldn't have done the third book without her, because she lent me the most phenomenal pins. I'd say the most wonderful pins that are in that book, other than the ones that were designed by the current, jewelry designers, which I think are fabulous too, were all loaned to me by Gay, which was so generous and kind of her. And she's amazing.
She's had a passion for collecting ever since she was a youngster.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I could see that. And she had such unique pins that I had really never seen before, which I was so happy to be able to feature in the book. So.
Yeah, and I think I had over 50 tree pins in your book, and I remember very carefully wrapping each of them and putting them in the mail and doing a Hail Mary.
Absolutely.
I hope these trees are okay.
I know, and I was so nervous about having them here, because and keeping them here and then shipping them back to you, because I borrowed pins from collectors from all over the country. Even though I have a lot of pins myself, I didn't want to have a lot of the same pins in Volume 3. You have to put some of the same ones, because there are ones that, new collectors are coming in onto the front all the time, and they want to see the coveted traditional pins, like the Weiss pin that came in 3 different sizes, which is another one, by the way, that's being reproduced madly, that if you go on eBay, you'll see. That's another tip for collectors, I think. If you go on eBay and you see the same pin, 30 versions of the same pin being sold over and over and over again, chances are that it's being reproduced.
And the names of the designers that you recommend, Weiss being one of them. What are some of the others that people should look for?
Well, for for the older designers, well, this is another thing. As Gay and I were talking yesterday, Hollycraft pins also are being reproduced. They never were reproduced before, but now they're getting molds and they're casting them, and they're doing a good job. The one that I had bought that was a reproduction, I think I said, was a Hollycraft. I could not tell, from the picture online that it was, a reproduction, and I actually had to even look very carefully when I got it home, but it was. And but Hollycraft, like some of their classic pins are just beautiful. I love them. I would say Hattie Carnegie is another name. If you can find some of Hattie Carnegie's Christmas pins, I always loved the one she did. And I was telling Gay, there's still a pin that I wished I had and I don't have anymore, and it's her angel with cascading pearls. They're not all Christmas trees. My book actually has Christmas pins. There are books on just Christmas trees as well. But I have all kinds like Santa's, and there's another very, very interesting current designer she's not actually producing pins anymore, but her name is Bettina von Wallhoff. And she's such a fascinating woman. She was actually part of a circus when she was young in Germany. And she came to this country, and she's just so talented. Her designs, her pins, her trees, and her Santas, they're about 5 inches, and they're filled with beautiful, beautiful stones. And she's very, very, and many of them like jiggle and move and what have you, so it makes it even more interesting.
Hey, Jill, I just remembered how we met.
How? How did we meet?
Because I'm holding this tree, this Bettina von Wallhoff tree in my hand.
I just took a photograph of it, too.
And
Did I sell that to you?
No, we traded.
We traded?
Yeah, I remember.
She has the one that you were looking for.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, gosh, I hope not.
No,
I would feel
that's
awful.
Not. It's the Hattie Carnegie Angel.
Yeah.
And another one. No, that's so funny. Well, that's the
we
other
traded.
One I want.
You wanted the Mylou peace tree that had the little tags for PEACE
right.
that dangle on the
Did I
tree.
get that one from you?
Yeah, you wanted it for a friend of yours, and I'm like, okay, so what do you have?
That's right. That's right. That's it. Isn't that
And
funny?
I kept asking you, and finally you're like, well, I do have a Bettina von Wallhoff, and I'm like, bingo!
I know. The problem is so many of my pins I can't part with either, so it's really, I'm selfish that way. But the other pin that I covet,
it was my first one
that I could kick myself for, I think I gave it to somebody after book 2 because he had begged me for it, and he had lent me all these pins for the book, and he begged me, and it was a Gerard Yaska pin that's also on your website that has mosaics. It looks like the stained glass windows.
Yes,
and
the Yaska.
We posted that one, Jill.
And when I contacted Gerard about it, I said, Gerard, is there any way I will beg, borrow, and steal if you still have one of those pins in your studio? And he searched high and low because he had moved studios since then. He said, we've looked through everything. Every time one sells on eBay now, I send him a copy of it showing him that it's sold for $450. He has to find his old mold so he can make one for me. But he's just a wonderful guy. But that's the other one that I really wish at some point I think I'm going to wind up having to buy it, but I don't want to spend $450 on eBay for it. So
yeah,
Gay's going to find one for me, right, Gay?
Yeah, I'm looking, sweetheart. I promise you. In fact, we were just fighting over, well, not fighting over, but we were both looking at this modernist Hollycraft tree that is really hard to find. I mean, it's like super chic tree.
Yes, yep.
And
I know which one you mean.
so mod looking.
Yep.
1960s was really the heyday of Christmas tree pins. I mean, tons were produced during that decade. And so Jill emails me, and she's like, Gay, I'm bidding on this Hollycraft tree on eBay, and she's like, do you happen to have the stones for it? And then I'm like, well, my husband's bidding on that tree too for me.
I have to say, I dropped out of the bidding immediately. I said, and then when I saw what it sold for, even with missing stones, I said, no, I want it, but not that bad.
Yeah, well, she was like incredibly sweet for dropping out because my husband was trying to get it for me for a Christmas present, which was really sweet of him.
Very sweet of him.
But we had a cap of, around $250. Well, the tree sold for over $330, and it was missing stones to boot. Yeah. So that gives you an idea of how rare this tree was, that people were willing to pay that much, even though it didn't have all the stones on it. So after it went above $250, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to have to give up on this one. And I'll find it again.
This
somehow.
sounds like there's a whole art to negotiating when it comes to trading and selling and so forth.
Oh yeah.
And you have to know quite a lot of information in order to be able to do it properly.
Yeah, definitely. And eBay can be tricky because they're, as Jill said, there are a lot of fakes out there. I mean, the Weiss fakes, most of them are pretty obvious. I mean, they're just crappily done is all I can say.
Exactly.
They have glued-in stones rather than prong set ones.
Right.
So these are things to look for when you're going for the jewelry. What are some of those things?
Yeah, anything I would say, for tree pins, the trees that have the prong set stones, like, you would have prongs on a ring holding your diamond in. Same thing in costume jewelry. The rhinestones actually have prongs to keep them up instead of being glued in. Those tend to be usually the nicer trees. And you can tell by the construction, I mean, just looking at it, the quality of the detail, the stones, that sort of thing, versus a tree that kind of has sloppy, drippy enamel on it, or really bright gold casting that obviously it was made in China. Just kind of simple things like that to look for. I mean, I think most people can spot quality when they see it versus something that's kind of stamped out.
I think that's so true.
Yeah.
I think that's so true. And I think also, there are companies that made older pins that they're not reproducing. Like there's a company called BJ, Beatrice, and Milu. I haven't seen any of those really reproduced. And even though BJ, the Beatrice pins, were really low end at the time when they were made, believe it or not, they also have some value now. I mean, when I say value, like they're not like pins that are in the hundreds, but I see them selling for like $20, $30, $35.
Oh no, they are in the hundreds now, Jill. Because I just sold
the BJ?
Oh yeah, I just sold the
Wow.
BJ basket weave tree for almost $200.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's
I'm
a rare.
glad to hear that because I have
That's
a
a
lot
rare
of
one to
BJ
find.
pins. That's amazing. I might. Well, Gay's going to do the fourth book, so
Yeah.
under her own name, so she can update everything. But Milu is another company that I think made very lovely pins, and another sort of like genre within the Christmas tree pins, which I love, are the partridge and pear tree pins.
Oh,
and there's
yes.
some wonderful, wonderful partridge and pear tree pins. I just have collected a lot of them over the years because I just love the song, Partridge in a Pear Tree. I guess because it has to do with music.
Yeah, a lot of people love, the 12 Days of Christmas song.
Exactly.
That's a very nostalgic Christmas song. I actually had a Partridge in a Pear Tree pin collection myself, Jill, but as I told you the other night, at the time I was financially struggling and I had to sell them off to pay my rent.
Oh boy, that's painful.
It was kind of like my nest egg. These trees that I have just continue to increase in value. I mean, that BJ pin, for example, that probably sold for, 50 cents or $1 or something back then, and I sold it for $200.
Wow.
I'm always telling people I think vintage jewelry is better than a 401k plan, personally.
Yeah. Well, I think in a
better
way you're
than
right
new
because,
jewelry too.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely.
You really
I had,
pulled. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say for the book 3, Bettina von Wallhoff had designed a partridge in a pear tree pin, which a lot of her jewelry she lent me, and then I shipped it all back to her, of course. And I said to her, if I would love to buy this pin, and she said, I can't sell it because it's the only one I have. And she is no longer producing jewelry. Believe it or not, she and her daughter and her husband, he's a dignitary, they run a refuge for injured animals down in Florida.
Oh, yeah, I'd heard that.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Her whole life has changed.
Well, you've given us an amazing peek behind the curtain of what it's like when it comes to the world of Christmas tree pins, and also sharing and trading and looking and searching. And so thank you so much, Jill, for joining us.
Yeah.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And Merry Christmas to everybody and happy collecting.
Okay.
Thank you,
All
Jill.
right,
Merry
take care.
Christmas.
Okay.
What a great conversation with her. How interesting. And this whole
She's
world.
a sweetheart.
Yeah, she is. And so knowledgeable about all of the jewelry. And as are you. We look forward to your next installment of
thank
If
you.
This Brooch Could Talk, which will be a monthly show. Any wrap up in terms of, we've talked about a jewelry topic, which is the Christmas tree pins, the jewelry tip, which is turning it over to make sure
Yeah,
that,
Jill kind of stole my thunder there.
what about a jewelry term?
Great Christmas tree pin minds think alike, I think. think. But the Christmas tree term having to do with turning it over is maker's mark. The mark, or sometimes called the signature, on the back of a piece. And I think we posted one for BJ that's on there. And BJ actually is the sign for the Beatrix Company. So sometimes the signature isn't always what the company name is. Sometimes it's very obvious, like Weiss. It'll just say Weiss, Weiss. But you can actually go online. There's a website for illusionjewels.com, and she has all the photographs of all these maker's marks. So you can figure out, what company it is, what years they produced jewelry. A lot of these companies are now retired. Like JJ, for example, I have this funky little tree pin in front of me that has a little Santa cap on his head, and he's got googly eyes.
That's cute.
JJ, for example, their company retired in 2002, so they're no longer making tree pins, which always affects the value, of course, when a company retires or is no longer making pins, because they're not making them anymore. There's a limited number, but looking at the maker's mark on the back, turning it over, and and also just enjoying them. Pick what you like. You see a tree that catches your eye, that's got the bling bling or has got the design you love. That's the best part of collecting, is just finding what you love.
Great. Well, we will take all of that to heart, and we certainly look forward to chatting with you again about wonderful jewelry. And thank you so much, Gay. And
thank you. Thanks, Ibby.
Join us our next installment of If This Brooch Could Talk.
Hi, I'm Angus McDonald from Deep River, Connecticut. You are listening to ICRV Radio, the stream feeding the River Valley.